Keanu Reeves had always been a figure of calm and mystery, known for his humility as much as his acting skills. On a warm afternoon in Los Angeles, he found himself attending a small charity event. This wasn't a high-profile gala, but rather an intimate gathering with friends and a few fans. Keanu had made a point of stepping away from the spotlight recently, preferring smaller, more meaningful interactions rather than the usual flashbulb chaos that surrounded his fame. He didn't mind it, he didn't seek attention, but instead, he wanted to be around good people, making a difference in small ways. The event was cozy, and there was no reason to believe that anything unusual would happen. The venue was a local community center, filled with colorful banners promoting the cause. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and Keanu stood in the back of the room, chatting with a few people he knew. They discussed everything from new movies to personal philosophies. It was a peaceful setting, a stark contrast to the flashing lights and headlines that usually followed him. Everyone was laughing, talking about the good things the event was supporting, and Keanu, as always, was just there to lend his presence, showing that he cared without drawing too much attention to himself. But fate has a way of disrupting the most ordinary moments, and on this day, it would do so in a way Keanu never could have anticipated. Around the time the event was nearing its end, a group of uniformed police officers suddenly entered the room. Keanu's attention was drawn away from the conversation as they moved toward him, their boots clicking sharply against the floor. He looked around, wondering if there was some sort of security concern, but he felt a strange unease in the air. The officers approached him directly, and before he could ask what was going on, one of them stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," the officer said. Keanu froze. It was the tone, the professionalism, that immediately set him on edge. But there was no sign of aggression, just an unsettling formality. "We need you to come with us." There was a brief pause. Keanu's mind raced for an explanation. His initial reaction was confusion. He opened his mouth to speak but was quickly interrupted. "You're under arrest." Keanu was stunned. His brain couldn't fully process the words. Arrest? What was happening? The officer continued, his face stern, but not unkind. "We're investigating a case involving a suspect matching your description. We need to verify your identity. Please cooperate, and this will be sorted out quickly." Keanu stood there, momentarily frozen. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to him, not like this. The atmosphere shifted in the room. Some people stopped talking, others whispered in confusion. Keanu could see their faces, friends and colleagues who were just as shocked as he was. The officer didn't seem to notice. He moved quickly, reaching for Keanu's wrists and pulling them behind his back, snapping the handcuffs around them. The cold metal felt like a shock to Keanu's skin, his heartbeat quickening as he tried to comprehend what was happening. His first instinct was to protest, to ask why, but as he looked into the eyes of the officer, he realized that any protest would only escalate the situation. Keanu, always composed in front of cameras and in life, found himself in an unfamiliar role, helpless, confused, and bewildered. "I'm innocent," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. But his words fell into a void as the officer led him through the room. The whispers grew louder. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the street. By now, word had spread like wildfire. Someone had recognized Keanu, and a few phones were already out, filming the scene. His mind raced, the panic setting in. How could this happen? How could a mistake like this land him in this situation? Keanu's agent was immediately contacted, though they were just as blindsided by the event. As the officers escorted him to the car, their voices remained firm. The arrest was calm, almost too calm. There was no shouting, no struggle, just a methodical process that made the whole situation feel more surreal. Keanu tried to keep his composure, though inside, his mind was reeling. The officer driving the car barely spoke. Keanu could sense the awkwardness, the confusion in the air. He didn't feel like a criminal, he didn't feel like he was in trouble. But the cuffs, the uncertainty, and the cold weight of it all made his stomach turn. He tried to think of a way to fix things, but nothing made sense. As they pulled into the police station, the small crowd of onlookers grew. Fans had gathered, and people who knew of Keanu, whether from his films or his charity work, stood in shock. No one knew what was happening, only that something didn't feel right. Keanu was led into the building, still handcuffed, his mind racing. Inside, the situation didn't improve. The station was noisy, people moving quickly, and the usual chaos of such a place made it feel even more bizarre. Keanu was escorted to a holding area, the cold, sterile walls reflecting the starkness of the moment. He sat in silence, staring at the floor, waiting for someone to explain what was going on, but nobody came. His mind churned, his thoughts were foggy with disbelief. What was happening to him? Why was this happening? He had never imagined that an afternoon meant to bring smiles and help to those in need would lead to something like this. It wasn't long before the story exploded onto social media. Fans took to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to express their shock and confusion. The hashtag Keanu Reeves arrested was soon trending worldwide, as people began speculating wildly. Some believed Keanu had been caught in some criminal activity, while others thought it was an overreaction by the police. Media outlets jumped on the story, and in a matter of hours, it was everywhere. Everyone had an opinion, but few had the facts. The public was left to wonder, what had really happened? And why was Keanu, of all people, caught in the middle of this? Despite all the chaos, Keanu remained quiet. He didn't give any statements to the press. He didn't offer an explanation. He knew that it wasn't his voice that people were hearing, but the media's narrative. And at that moment, he couldn't change it. But as the minutes passed, one thing became clear, the clock was ticking, and Keanu Reeves was no longer in control of his own story. The moment Keanu Reeves stepped into the police station, the surreal nature of the situation hit him like a wave. He had spent his life avoiding the public spotlight, keeping his personal life private and his public image clean. But now, here he was, in the midst of a nightmare, sitting in a cold, sterile holding area, his hands still bound by handcuffs. The officers had placed him in a small, uncomfortable room. He was alone, save for the constant hum of the station's activity around him. The sound of distant voices, the clattering of keyboards, and the occasional buzz of a phone created a strange soundtrack to the most bizarre moment of his life. Despite everything that had happened, Keanu remained calm, his mind still processing the events that had led him to this point. Outside the room, the media frenzy was reaching a boiling point. Social media exploded with accusations, speculations, and questions. Videos of Keanu being escorted into the station circulated instantly, each frame adding fuel to the fire. People on Twitter were posting theories about his arrest, with some claiming he had been involved in criminal activities, while others suggested the police had made a serious mistake. The hashtag Keanu Reeves arrested trended within minutes, and soon enough, the news outlets picked up the story. Keanu was shocked at how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. The truth, of course, was that he had been mistaken for someone else. The police officers involved were simply doing their jobs, but the whole situation had become a media circus. It wasn't long before the first reports began to filter through the public. Keanu was the victim of a case of mistaken identity. But even with the truth beginning to surface, the damage had already been done. While Keanu sat silently in the holding room, trying to come to terms with the whirlwind around him, the police officers in charge of the arrest were also trying to manage the growing chaos. They had realized quickly that they had made a grave error in apprehending the famous actor, but the problem was far from simple. Public perception had already been shaped, and no matter what they did now, they couldn't undo the damage. In the early hours after the arrest, Keanu's team, his agent, publicist, and lawyer were working around the clock, trying to calm the storm that was brewing outside the station. The pressure was immense. They were all well aware of the potential fallout. Keanu had always been an actor who commanded respect not just for his talent, but also for his good-natured, down-to-earth personality. Yet now, his reputation was being tested in a way none of them had ever imagined. The media outlets were relentless. Some focused on the facts, trying to report the story as accurately as possible, while others indulged in wild speculation. TV anchors, reporters, and bloggers threw out every possible theory, from accusing Keanu of being involved in a criminal conspiracy to questioning his mental state. The fact that he was a well-known, beloved figure only made the situation more complicated. It felt as though the public was caught between disbelief and anger. How could something like this happen to Keanu, of all people? Meanwhile, inside the police station, the officers involved in the arrest were also beginning to feel the weight of their actions. While they had simply been following protocol, their poor judgment was now under a microscope. The senior officer who had authorized the arrest began to regret the decision as soon as the confusion was cleared up. But by that point, it was too late to reverse the damage. The arrest had already been made, and Keanu was already at the center of a media storm. Word quickly spread that the arrest was a case of mistaken identity. The real suspect had been apprehended elsewhere, and Keanu was released from custody after a few hours of questioning. But even after his release, Keanu's life was far from normal. The media was still obsessed with the story. Headlines screamed about the Keanu Reeves arrest for days, and every outlet seemed to have a different version of events. The truth didn't matter as much as the drama. The story had already taken on a life of its own. While Keanu was released from the police station, he wasn't free from the chaos that followed. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and reporters. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Even some of his most loyal fans couldn't believe the story. How could someone like Keanu, the actor known for his kindness, be mixed up in something so shocking? The fallout from the arrest extended far beyond Keanu. The police officers who had been involved in the arrest now found themselves under intense scrutiny. They had made a serious error, and now they were being held accountable for it. The department launched an internal investigation into the incident, and the officers involved in the mistaken arrest were placed on leave while the situation was reviewed. Their careers, once seemingly secure, were now in jeopardy. They had done their jobs, but they had done so poorly, and now they were paying the price for it. As the days passed, Keanu's team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. Statements were released, interviews were given, and legal action was considered. Keanu himself remained quiet, not wanting to add fuel to the fire. His silence only intensified the public's curiosity. Some believed he was being wrongfully accused of something, while others questioned his role in the event. But one thing was clear: his reputation was on the line. Keanu's friends and colleagues in the entertainment industry quickly came to his defense. Fellow actors, directors, and producers spoke out in support of him, insisting that Keanu was the victim of a mistake. They pointed to his years of hard work, his humble demeanor, and his unwavering commitment to the causes he supported. But despite their best efforts, the media had already shifted its focus, and Keanu's name was being dragged through the mud. By now, the officers involved in the arrest were under investigation, and the backlash against them grew stronger with every passing day. The public seemed to have already judged them guilty, and many felt they were being unfairly punished for a simple mistake. However, there was no denying that their actions had sparked a nationwide conversation about accountability, fairness, and the role of law enforcement. Keanu, for his part, continued to keep a low profile. He wasn't interested in the public spectacle, he just wanted to move on from the whole situation. But as the media continued to report on the incident, his every move was being watched. There was no escaping the storm he had found himself in. Though the arrest had been a mistake, it had changed everything. Keanu Reeves, once a beloved actor known for his kindness and humility, was now embroiled in a controversy that was shaking his career and his personal life. And in the midst of it all, the officers involved had to face the consequences of their poor decision-making, realizing that one moment of confusion had completely derailed their lives as well. As the days went by, the media frenzy surrounding Keanu Reeves' arrest only intensified. Though the truth had come out, Keanu had been arrested by mistake, and the real suspect was caught elsewhere. The damage to his reputation had already been done. The public's perception of the situation was something that could not be easily reversed. The once quiet actor, known for his humility and kind nature, had now become the center of an international news story, one that no one had seen coming. Keanu's phone rang constantly, with messages from reporters, friends, and even strangers. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on what had happened. Some were supportive, voicing their outrage over how Keanu had been treated. Others, however, questioned his involvement in the whole incident. The rumors started to grow. Some even claimed that there was more to the story than anyone knew. The truth seemed to get lost in the noise of speculation. The truth, of course, was simple enough. Keanu had been mistaken for someone else. The police had acted on a description that, in their minds, matched Keanu's appearance. But in reality, it was a case of bad luck and poor judgment. The officer who had led the charge in arresting him had misidentified Keanu as a suspect in a recent high-profile case. It was a mistake that, in the end, cost a lot more than just a few minutes of time. It cost trust, reputation, and peace of mind for everyone involved. Keanu had been released from the station a few hours after the arrest, once the mix-up had been cleared up. The police issued a statement, acknowledging their mistake and clarifying that Keanu was not involved in any criminal activity. But by then, it was too late. The public had already made up its mind, and the story had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The media continued to report on the incident, with new angles and theories emerging daily. Some outlets claimed that the whole situation had been staged, while others suggested that Keanu had deliberately gotten involved in a scheme. The more the media speculated, the more the public became divided. As for Keanu, he remained silent. He had learned over the years that sometimes the best thing to do was to wait for the noise to die down. He had been in the public eye long enough to know how quickly stories could change, how opinions could shift, and how the truth could sometimes be buried under layers of sensationalism. But that didn't make it any easier. He was still shocked by how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control, and how something as simple as a misunderstanding could cause so much harm. Keanu's agent and publicist worked tirelessly to manage the situation, issuing statements and holding press conferences to clarify the facts. They explained how the arrest had been a result of mistaken identity and reassured the public that Keanu was in no way involved in any criminal activity. But their efforts to calm the storm were met with mixed results. Some people accepted the explanation, but others refused to believe it. The more the story circulated, the more Keanu's name became associated with scandal. It was a hard pill to swallow, especially for someone who had spent his entire career avoiding controversy and public drama. Meanwhile, the police officers involved in the arrest found themselves at the center of an investigation. The department had launched an internal review of the incident, and the officers who had made the arrest were placed on leave while the matter was being looked into. The officer who had led the arrest was particularly under scrutiny, as he was the one who had misidentified Keanu in the first place. While the mistake was understood to be an honest one, it had still caused significant damage. The investigation into the police officers began to reveal the complexities of the situation. The officers involved were not bad people, they were simply doing their jobs, following procedures that had been in place for years. But the problem was that they had failed to properly assess the situation before making the arrest. They had acted quickly, without taking the time to properly verify the identity of the person they had detained. In a case like this, where someone's reputation was on the line, that mistake was unforgivable. The public response to the police officers' actions was swift and harsh. Many people felt that the officers had been too quick to act, without considering the consequences of their actions. Some even argued that the police had been overly aggressive in handling the situation, treating Keanu as a criminal simply because of his appearance. The backlash against the officers was intense, and soon, their personal lives began to be scrutinized. The media dug into their backgrounds, looking for any information that might explain how something like this could happen. It wasn't long before both the officer who had led the arrest and his partner were placed on indefinite leave. The internal investigation into the officer's conduct continued, but public opinion was already set. It didn't matter that they had made an honest mistake, the damage had already been done. Their careers were now in jeopardy, and they were being held accountable for the chaos that had unfolded in the aftermath of the arrest. For Keanu, the situation remained uncomfortable. His friends and colleagues rallied around him, offering support and speaking out against the media's treatment of him. Some actors even took to social media to defend him, calling out the unjust nature of the entire ordeal. Despite the public backing, Keanu still felt the sting of what had happened. It was one thing to be a target for the media during the course of his career, but this was different. This was personal. It wasn't just a role or a film, it was his life that had been turned upside down. Behind the scenes, Keanu's team was working on damage control. They were preparing a statement that would clarify the events, reaffirming that Keanu had done nothing wrong and that the entire situation had been a misunderstanding. The team also reached out to potential sponsors and partners, reassuring them that Keanu's image was still intact despite the media storm. But Keanu, ever humble and grounded, couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. His reputation, his career, and his peace of mind had all been shaken. While Keanu remained quiet, waiting for the noise to die down, the situation continued to escalate. The media wasn't ready to let go of the story just yet. The more they reported on it, the more they tried to make sense of the events, the more questions were raised. Some speculated about the motivations behind the police officers' actions. Others tried to tie Keanu's name to other controversial events. The story had taken on a life of its own, and Keanu was struggling to get a handle on it. Through it all, Keanu held on to one thing, the truth. He knew the truth about what had happened, and he knew that eventually, the public would come to see it. But that didn't mean the damage wouldn't be lasting. The entire incident had been a stark reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control, even for someone as untouchable as Keanu Reeves. The media frenzy surrounding Keanu Reeves' arrest reached a new level of intensity as the days stretched on. What had started as a case of mistaken identity had now morphed into a public spectacle, with every twist and turn feeding the news cycle. Despite the truth eventually coming out that Keanu had been mistakenly arrested, the fallout was far from over. For Keanu, this wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about repairing the damage done to his career and public image, while trying to regain some sense of normalcy in a world that now seemed completely out of his control. As the media storm raged on, Keanu found himself caught in a whirlwind of scrutiny and speculation. Every aspect of his life seemed to be under a microscope. The public's reaction was divided. Some rallied behind him, supporting him through the confusion, while others couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than met the eye. The truth had barely been reported before the media moved on to the next angle, the next salacious detail to sensationalize. Keanu had never been one for the limelight, and this was a level of attention that he wasn't prepared for. His team, tirelessly working behind the scenes, had issued multiple statements to clarify the situation. They spoke about the mix-up, explained the chain of events that led to the arrest, and made it clear that Keanu had been a victim of a simple error. Yet, the narrative in the media refused to settle on this version of the truth. The more the public saw the sensationalized headlines and watched the endless news reports, the harder it became for Keanu's image to recover. The questions continued: Was Keanu involved in something more dangerous? Had the police really made such a mistake? Why had Keanu, of all people, been arrested? In the face of all this, Keanu did what he had done throughout his entire career: he remained quiet. He wasn't interested in feeding into the spectacle. He knew that speaking out too forcefully would only draw more attention to the controversy. His silence, though, was misinterpreted by some as guilt, and the longer the situation dragged on, the more he began to feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't angry, rather, he was deeply frustrated that something so trivial had become so blown out of proportion. Meanwhile, the police officers involved in the arrest found themselves facing consequences far greater than they had imagined. Though the arrest had been a mistake, the backlash from the public, the media, and even within the department was swift and severe. It wasn't just about the mistake anymore, it was about the perception that the officers had acted too hastily, without sufficient evidence or care in identifying the suspect. The more the investigation unfolded, the more it became clear that the officers hadn't followed proper procedures in confirming Keanu's identity before detaining him. What had been a small, unintentional error had now turned into a public relations nightmare for the police department. The department launched an internal investigation, looking into the actions of the officers involved. It wasn't long before the officers were placed on administrative leave while the situation was reviewed. Though the department issued a statement acknowledging that the arrest was a mistake, the damage was already done. The officers had acted without caution, rushing into a situation that should have been handled with more care. Public opinion quickly turned against them, and their careers, which had once seemed secure, were now in jeopardy. The investigation into the officers' conduct revealed several failures in procedure. The officer who had led the arrest, in particular, came under intense scrutiny. He had acted with certainty in identifying Keanu, but had failed to double-check the information before making the arrest. The fact that Keanu was a well-known figure only made the situation worse. The officer's mistake was now being seen as a failure not just in his duties, but in his judgment. The public's anger was palpable, and many felt that the officers had been too quick to treat Keanu as a criminal, based solely on his appearance. As the investigation continued, more details emerged about the police officers' previous work. Journalists dug into their records, searching for any signs of misconduct or previous errors in their careers. The media's focus shifted from Keanu to the officers, as people began to question whether they were fit for their roles in law enforcement. The officers had become symbols of the failures in the system, an example of how things could go wrong when proper protocols weren't followed. For them, the consequences of their actions were swift and harsh. The department quickly distanced itself from the officers, and the public demand for accountability grew louder with each passing day. In the midst of all this, Keanu's team continued to try to mitigate the fallout. They reached out to key industry leaders, reassuring them that the incident was a misunderstanding. However, some brands, businesses, and producers were hesitant to publicly align with Keanu, fearing the negative attention that still surrounded him. The arrest had become a cloud hanging over his career, and though many believed he was innocent, the uncertainty of the situation made some companies wary. Despite the ongoing media frenzy, Keanu remained largely out of the public eye. His team worked on damage control, issuing statements and clarifying facts as much as they could. Keanu's friends and colleagues in the film industry began to show their support, publicly standing by him. Fellow actors, directors, and producers who had worked with Keanu for years spoke out in defense of his character. They emphasized that Keanu was a kind and honest person, and that the events surrounding his arrest were purely a case of unfortunate timing and confusion. Keanu, though grateful for the support, didn't engage with the media himself. He remained focused on moving forward, knowing that no amount of media spin could undo the damage done in the public's eye. He quietly resumed his regular activities, participating in charity events and continuing his work in film, but it was clear that his reputation had been affected. He could no longer walk into a room without the weight of the past few days hanging over him. The simple joy he once found in his quiet, humble life seemed to be slipping away, replaced by the relentless scrutiny of the world around him. The police officers involved, however, faced a much harsher reality. Their careers, once promising, were now at a crossroads. The internal investigation revealed the depth of their mistakes, and though they had acted with good intentions, the public couldn't look past the error. The officer who had led the arrest was put under severe pressure to resign, while the others involved faced disciplinary action. In the end, the department made it clear that such mistakes would not be tolerated, and the officers involved were permanently removed from their roles. For Keanu, the situation was far from over. While the media attention eventually began to die down, the scars of the incident remained. The controversy had changed the way the public saw him, and even though he had been innocent from the start, the damage had been done. Keanu would always carry the weight of that day with him, even if the truth had finally come to light. The incident had reminded him, and everyone watching, just how fragile public perception could be. The dust from the chaotic situation surrounding Keanu Reeves' arrest had finally started to settle, but the lasting effects of the incident lingered for everyone involved. Despite the official statements and media clarifications, the reputations of the people caught up in the scandal had been changed forever. For Keanu, it wasn't just a simple mix-up, it had been a traumatic experience that would forever shape his relationship with the public, the media, and even himself. And while the truth had finally come out, the damage done to his career, his peace of mind, and his personal life was not something that could be easily undone. In the weeks following the incident, Keanu's life continued to be scrutinized. Though the media eventually moved on to other stories, the echoes of the arrest still clung to him. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how the public had reacted, how the media had sensationalized the event, and how quickly the narrative had shifted from one of innocence to one of doubt. Keanu, known for his quiet, humble demeanor, found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending his integrity, even though he had done nothing wrong. Despite this, Keanu did his best to keep a low profile. He continued to attend charity events, focusing on the causes that mattered to him. He was seen around town, keeping to his routine, but there was no escaping the occasional glance or hushed whisper. Some people still believed the media's narrative, and the quiet conversations followed him wherever he went. But Keanu refused to let the situation define him. Instead, he carried on, hoping that over time, the public would remember him for the things he had done before the incident, not just for the moment when his name had been caught up in a media storm. Keanu's friends and colleagues in the industry stood by him, offering their full support. Fellow actors, directors, and producers who had worked with him for years spoke out in defense of his character, calling the arrest a tragic mistake that was blown out of proportion. They knew who Keanu really was: kind, generous, and always willing to lend a hand to those in need. They knew that this incident wasn't reflective of his true character, but rather a moment of unfortunate circumstances that had spiraled out of control. However, despite their support, the road to recovery wasn't an easy one. It took time, and Keanu's career, though still successful, felt the aftershocks. Some producers hesitated to cast him, worried about the lingering effects of the incident. While many in the industry knew the truth, the public perception was still clouded by the sensationalized nature of the arrest. And for Keanu, that uncertainty made it hard to continue his work with the same enthusiasm he once had. His joy for acting, his passion for storytelling, felt somewhat diminished. The carefree spirit that had once defined his career was now overshadowed by the weight of the past. Despite this, Keanu found solace in his personal life. He spent more time with close friends, enjoying moments of quiet reflection away from the spotlight. He took long walks, read books, and focused on the things that brought him peace. It was during these quiet moments that Keanu began to heal, realizing that while his reputation had been damaged, the core of who he was remained unchanged. He was still the same Keanu, the one who helped those in need, who lived humbly, and who wanted nothing more than to make a positive impact in the world. On the other side of the story, the police officers involved in the arrest faced consequences that would haunt them for years to come. Though the department had initially issued a statement acknowledging the mistake, the officers' careers were far from safe. The internal investigation revealed serious shortcomings in the way they had handled the situation. They had failed to properly verify the suspect's identity before making the arrest, and that failure led to Keanu's public humiliation. The officer who had made the decision to arrest Keanu was forced to resign. His reputation, once built on years of service, had been irreparably damaged. While the mistake had been unintentional, the consequences were clear. His lack of caution had cost him his career. The other officers involved in the incident were also reassigned, though none of them faced the same level of scrutiny as the officer in charge. But their lives, too, were changed by the incident. Their actions had led to a national conversation about police accountability, and they would forever be linked to the mistake that had ruined Keanu's day and damaged their own futures. In the aftermath of the scandal, public opinion on law enforcement began to shift. The incident sparked debates about how police officers handle high-profile cases and the importance of careful investigation before making arrests. The officers' actions were viewed as a cautionary tale, one that reminded everyone of the importance of due process and the consequences of acting too hastily. While the officers had made an honest mistake, the public demanded accountability for their actions. Their careers would never be the same. For Keanu, the story eventually faded from the front pages of the news. The media found new scandals to report, and public interest slowly waned. But the impact of the incident lingered, and Keanu found that his path forward was more challenging than he had ever anticipated. Yet, with time, he began to regain his place in the hearts of the public. His quiet resilience, his refusal to let the situation define him, slowly began to turn the tide in his favor. Keanu's career began to pick up again, though he approached his work with more caution than before. The industry, which had once welcomed him with open arms, now felt different. The trust that had been built over the years had been shaken, and it would take time to restore. But Keanu was determined to move forward. He didn't want to be defined by the mistake made that day. He wanted to be remembered for the work he had done, for the kindness he had shown, and for the positive impact he had made on the world. And slowly, that's exactly what began to happen. Keanu's legacy as an actor, a philanthropist, and a person of great character began to shine through once more. The public, once skeptical, started to see beyond the headlines. They saw the Keanu they had always admired, the man who remained humble in the face of fame, the one who had never let success change him. He was more than just an actor, he was a symbol of resilience and grace in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And so, Keanu Reeves moved forward, not unscathed, but wiser. He had learned that the truth could be lost in the noise of the world, that public perception could be more powerful than reality, and that sometimes, the path to redemption was long and uncertain. But in the end, he found peace. Not because the world had forgiven him, but because he had forgiven himself.